And I got one more. Hey, everybody. Thanks for your patience. We were just talking through some of the material we're going to cover today. Hope everybody is having a good day. Glad you're able to join the Hormone Happy Hour. It looks like it's more of an intimate call today. We only have a couple people join. So, what we'll do is we'll run through a new diagnostic that I'm learning more about. Just kind of wanted to talk through some of the basic stuff and kind of give a deeper layer versus standard blood serum testing. After we cover that, we can go in and answer whatever questions we have as a group. So what I'm going to start with is a share screen, and the test we're looking at is a true age test, and some people may see this marketed online as like an epigenetic score. The big things that I was just talking to the coaches about, I'm a little unsure of is it's all algorithm based. I think that with all of the places you can submit DNA, algorithm is probably pretty good. We've been, doing different types of what was it, 21 and Me and all of the different things. I think they've collected a lot of data over people. I'm a weirdo, so I won't submit my DNA. But I think that this is heavily weighted on a score. So I would not say that the science is 100%. I'm sure people would argue with me on that, but I think it's interesting to say less. So what I'm going to do is cover the slides of what it is, and then we'll look at a client sample that I have and talk through some of the markers. So, true age versus standard blood work. What are epigenetics and what do they show that traditional lab work won't show? So, I think that this is kind of interesting. A lot of it's going to be around methylation, immune function, and then further metabolic processes along glucose and IGF-1, as those can be weighted in the aging conversation. So, same birthday, different biology. Two people can be born on the same day, yet their bodies have aged at very different rates. I would say that is true. I see lots of people around the same age, and depending on how well they take care of themselves, is a pretty good reflection of what their body is showing. Um, so some of the things, chronological age, so obviously the day you were born, simple and universal, and then biological age. I think probably in the past 15 years, this has become a topic. David Sinclair is one of the like original biohackers who was talking a lot about telomere lengths and biological age. So it's an estimation of how old your body behaves internally, reads from molecular patterns on your DNA, and this is the numbers that we can actually influence. So I do think that we can influence epigenetics, and we'll get into some of the specifics of that. Um, Sorry, I got somebody else joining. So what standard blood work does and what it doesn't tell you. So obviously we do a lot of blood serum here. We do some specialty testing, GI and Dutch testing, but I'd say a lot, a lot of clients are coming in with blood work. And it is just a snapshot of right now. So if you're lucky, you can get things like a full thyroid panel, lipids, A1C, glucose. I would say insulin could fit into that section as well. Kidney, liver function as of today, hormonal levels, depending if you're pre, peri, or postmenopausal, that can fluctuate quite a bit. Blood count and inflammatory flags. Excellent for spotting acute or established problems. And then getting into more of genetic testing, some of the blind spots, how you're aging, the trajectory, not on the dot. So this test is very interesting and kind of will line out all of your systems and show you based off of your chronological age um, what your epigenetics are influencing and what that looks like. Cumulative wear across organ systems, which I think is pretty cool to look at. I think a lot of times we see one-offs, poor kidney function could be an example. And, individual may not know. And I think epigenetics could be in the future a really good tool to be able to look at and be able to prevent disease further. And I know there's a bunch of new tests coming out to identify a genome around cancer, and I just think medicine's going to get better and better, and epigenetics are part of that conversation. Um, Other things that are in here, the molecular impact of sleep, stress, and lifestyle. One of the cool things I've seen on this test is I would say our program is global. So I'd say people pretty much around the globe consume alcohol. I'll actually give you some risk assessment based off of your methylation and detoxification of alcohol, potentially how bad that is for you. So I think that that's kind of cool to understand like potential ramifications if you are going to consume alcohol, and then which systems are aging ahead of others. And I think as a collective, as a coaching group, we're usually working on like biggest problem areas. And I think this test could be potentially pretty cool as it advances of showing where you probably need to put more focus, and then other areas that are actually working optimally. Maybe they don't need as much attention in the short term. Um, So what are epigenetics? Your DNA is the hardware, the fixed genetic code you inherited. Epigenetics is the software that decides which genes are switched on, switched off, dialed up, and turned down at any moment. Putting in here DNA methylation, the main marker we read, works like a dimmer switch. Small chemical tags attached to DNA and quiet a gene down, remove them, or brighten them back up. And there's pharmaceuticals that do this, there's peptides that do this, there's lots of natural things that can influence this as well. Um, these patterns shift as we age, so hormones will play a role in that. Sleep and stress, illness, which exactly why they can be read as a clock and how you respond based off of how you live. And then, just like a little note here, why it matters, estrogen declines in menopause. It itself is an epigenetic response. That loss of hormones will impact your epigenetics. It will change what genes are expressed across bone, brain, metabolism, blood vessels. We talk a lot about potential risk of decline of estrogen and osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease. So how an epigenetic clock is built. So it's measured, hundreds and thousands of methylation sites are read in a single blood or saliva sample. I believe true age is blood. Those patterns are compared against thousands of people of the known same age and health. And then the predictor, and that's where I'm still kind of on the fence. I just don't think the algorithm's there 100%, but still very cool to look at. And outputs of biological age. And in newer clocks, it pace organ by organ breakdown. So kind of showing potential breakdowns of organs. Um, and the true age is based off of 133 biomarkers, which is a good amount for sure. Comparing standard blood work versus the epigenetic. So molecules circulating right now, how your DNA regulates over time. Um, Questions that standard blood work answers, what are your current levels now versus what epigenetics could look at? How old is my body? How fast am I aging? Time horizon, single moment, as soon as they stab that needle in your arm, we're getting those readings versus a trajectory and an accumulation over time. Organ system view, indirect in a blood serum, one marker at a time. And then based off of the algorithm, 11 organ systems scored separately. I would say blood serum is best used for diagnosing and monitoring conditions. I would say blood serum intravenous draw is going to be the best thing that's available right now. I also see capillary testing becoming really popular. I'm sure everybody here has had something on their social media pop up where you can put a little device on your arm and it extracts blood and they can give you your lab report. Capillary draw is going to be a lot different than what's in the vein. And if we're looking at what medicine uses right now to diagnose disease, it's an intravenous draw. So that standard blood panel is going to be your best option over epigenetics, over capillary draw. But I think all of these could potentially have some benefits depending on the individual. So yeah, neither will replace each other. I just think of them kind of aggregate data and compounding, giving you more information. Um, so they will do, and this is using this lady's sample. So the biological age of 51, the organ system age, which is 56, and age of pacing. So this individual is aging about a year slower than intended age, um, which is interesting. I think that the score is kind of weighted weird, and I'll show you all the sample here in a minute. But I think a lot of it is going to be heavily influenced on organ systems for this individual. Um, and kind of getting into the symphony aging one organ system at a time, kind of outlining all this. Inflammation, liver, immune, metabolic, heart are influenced here. On her specific sample, a lot of the hormone, blood, brain, kidney, lung look normal. So it's giving more of a weighted score on these. Um, So some of the biological drivers and other processes, because methylation controls gene expression everywhere, and epigenetic panel doubles as a window into the process that shapes how you feel and function. I agree with that. I think some of the things that I really like on the True Age is showing some of the deeper rooted inflammatory markers. We talked about a month ago about some additional markers you could look at on blood can also look at some of the epigenetic markers around interleukin 6 or IL-6 down here, and then some of the methylation markers around C-reactive protein and that inflammation process. Um, Immune aging as well. I'd say that that's an interesting component of this test. And then the metabolic health is something that I'm still learning about. And I'm going to use this person as an example. She's been working for several years on metabolic health, no longer is pre-diabetic, but a lot of her epigenetic scores are still reading that she has issues regulating glucose and her hemoglobin A1C is potentially an issue. I'm thinking that's weighted off of glycated hemoglobin and getting that epigenetic score. And then your hormones are going to play a role in this as well. For those on HRT, I think that this obviously can be shifted pretty significantly from an epigenetic reading if you're supplementing BHRT and how that can impact your score. I actually want to show you all the test. So let me see, there's a lot of information. And they'll give you a lot of lifestyle modifications within the test. So let's do that because I think it's interesting to look at the different samples. And I don't know how much this costs. I'm going to throw that out. Somebody will probably ask me at the end of this call. This client does lots of advanced testing. It may be a couple $100 to, I don't know, in the thousands. I haven't done one myself. Um, so this is True Age, and here are some of the scores that they weight here. She is 54. So you can see this top marker, she's a couple years younger. Or organ system, she's actually about 2 years older. And then the pace of aging is about a year, a little less than a year than her chronological age. And then they'll give you a graph of where you fit within the average. I would say kind of based off of her chronological age, her epigenetic score is pretty on par with where she is. I think a lot of people um, obviously want to have a better aging process, so they want a lower score here. And she is somewhat younger here, and we'll look at some of the markers that influence that. The things that stuck out to me, and I just hit on this, they'll give you the most actionable epigenetic markers. And I will do lab reviews with people, and I hear a lot of times like, oh, I have prediabetes in my family, or diabetes, or high cholesterol. Um, Even if you have those under control, if there are some epigenetic things happening there, it's something you probably have to continue to work at. I've openly talked about diabetes being in my family, and I'm very fit, and I still have issues regulating my blood sugar. So I do a lot of things to control that. And the epigenetic testing is really interesting. We just did labs on hers. Her glucose, her insulin, A1C were all normal, but the epigenetics actually read a little bit higher. So they'll give you the recommendations. These are things a lot of us are doing or know. So controlled carbohydrates, stay active, uh, manage weight, avoid sugar. I'd put an asterisk around that, some sugar. If you're having fruit, I would be less concerned with that, but manage stress, consider medications if advised by your physician, consider supplements, and then they'll list out potentially some of the supplements that are in here, as well as fiber-rich foods, which we preach pretty much every week to get enough fiber. Um, they'll give you the score on the A1C and then the IGF-1 binding protein 2. I think this one's really interesting. A lot of people will look at IGF-1 on blood serum, and that's a byproduct of growth hormone at the liver. IGF-1 binding protein 2 is a binding protein of IGF-1. High IGF-1 is associated with higher cell turnover, cell proliferation. I also think too low of IGF-1 is not good either because we need some sort of anabolism to maintain muscle mass. So I think there's a fine balance with this. So for anybody looking at this who may be really into wanting to reverse age, I think that you could go either direction. You don't want too much anabolism and growth, but too little. Sarcopenia, muscle loss is something a lot of people deal with as they age. So somewhere in the middle would probably be my recommendation. If they're giving you the score of 87 and over 80, I would be curious what that lower level and what an optimal range is. They don't really list that on this test. And then some of the markers, some of these I'm not really as familiar with. This is going to be in regards to nitrogen recycling. So they'll give you some recommendations, if applicable, excess protein intake. Um, I think this individual actually does a like desiccated beef supplement. And this they'll talk a little bit about organ meats. So I think she's reading high, just maybe due to some of the supplements she's using. Um, and then you'll have some of these proteins that are associated with tissue remodeling and inflammation. Avoid being underweight, increase moderate intense activity. I think that's interesting. I don't know as much about some of these epigenetic markers. And then the organ systems. So this is really interesting, kind of highlighting chronological, symphony, blood, brain, inflammation, heart. So this individual was on a statin, now doing a PCSK9 inhibitor. Cholesterol is controlled, but there uh, is some calcification of arteries. She's working with the cardiologist, but it's interesting that the epigenetics pick up on that. Um, and that's something that is present. So I don't know if that's just luck or if there's some accuracy there, but pretty interesting. Hormones are lesser than her chronological age. She's on HRT. She does have Epstein-Barr virus reactivation. She has a lot of IgG response off and on. So it's interesting that the immune is like at age or slightly over her age. Kidney, liver, metabolic, lung, and musculoskeletal as well. And I think that that's a really big piece. You can do all the fancy testings you want. You can take all the BHRT that you want, but if you're not eating enough protein, you're not exercising, there's not much you can do to improve your muscle mass. And that's something I've been working with this client on is improving activity. And you can see that she's actually aging faster. She doesn't have much muscle mass. Um, And then kind of systems related to biomarkers. So what's included in blood would be like ferritin, hemoglobin, hematocrit, uh, MCV, hemoglobin, just basically all the things that make up red blood cell. I think it's interesting that they have some things around brain. So on our blood serum, we actually look at homocysteine quite a bit, but they're taking in brain-derived neurotrophic factor serum, as well as some of these other markers that I'm not familiar with. But I think the BDNF is really interesting in learning more about that is something that I would be interested in looking at. Now, I think like the inflammation stuff probably has some validity around ferritin, CRPs. Um, you have some of your growth factors, interleukins, and TNF alpha. Uh, and then they'll give the heart, around blood pressure, shortness of breath, previous stroke. Homocysteine is heavily influenced there as well. Um, yeah, and it's interesting that they weight a lot of the hormonal biomarkers just off of IGF-1 and DHEA. We know there's a lot more that goes into that. So I do think there's some shortcomings here. And then immune actually looks pretty robust. You have a lot of these things that you would get in your CBC, but then you get into dendritic cells, some of the memory cells. And I think a lot of that's around immunity. So our immune system adapts, and we do have like basically a memory. So like if you're exposed to one illness, your immune system kind of adapts to that naturally or through vaccination. But showing that like surveillance cells, memory cells, and then that's weighted within this average. I'm not as well versed in that, but I just thought it was interesting. And then you'll have things like kidney, getting into creatinine, cystatin C, and then how well you're managing electrolytes from the kidneys. And then liver health, albumin, alk phos, ALT, AST, bilirubin, and total protein, giving you a score there. Um, I wanted to see, and these are those memory cells that I was talking about. So yeah, the last piece is like telomere length, and I don't know how much I believe in telomere length, and I'm not trying to poke holes in this test, or maybe someone who has done this test and really likes it. I just don't think we know about telomeres and lengths, and I don't know if we have enough science to back that. But shorter telomere lengths, potentially related to damaged DNA and issues with epigenetic expression. This individual's is pretty good. You can see she's about a year and a half younger than her biological age. Um, yeah, and then some of the inflammatory markers, things that I do believe in, C-reactive proteins, interleukin 6. And this was kind of the other piece I wanted to show is uh, tobacco smoking. I think less people now in 2026 smoke, but maybe 20 or 30 years ago, like a test like this could probably provide a lot of information, kind of giving you an epigenetic predictor of smoking risk and then alcohol risk. Now, the thing I would say for anybody doing this test, even if you have a low epigenetic biomarker for alcohol, I still don't think you should drink it. I just don't think it's the best thing for you. And if you are going to consume it in moderation, I think this is interesting. If you're interested in this test, what I would say is research and try to understand some of the markers that are influenced in that process. A lot of information here, though. Does anybody have any specific questions? I don't want to try to get too caught up in the weeds because I'm really just learning about this. Maybe I'll do another hormone happy hour on some of these additional markers when I know more about them. But I do think it's interesting and just kind of highlighting all of the other potential testings that are available. And if not, we can answer some questions. If you have any just general questions for us, we have all the coaches here. We did have some additional people join later in the call. Really, I like to open up for 10, 15 minutes and see if we can answer. It doesn't have to be epigenetic, it can be hormonal, it can be diet, lifestyle, stress management, supplements. We're happy to spend some time and unpack that. Okay.
I have a question. I
Yeah.
have several clients, I just know several people in general that have really low ferritin. Their thyroid's really messed up, I would say, for lack of a better term. Can you correlate the association between iron and thyroid and maybe how they would intersect or how they would bounce off each other and then kind of the causes? What can they do for low, like super low iron when it
Yeah,
seems impossible to get it back up?
I'd say what usually if you go to your doctor, because I've worked with several people with really low iron transfusion. And I'm not saying like go do that. A lot of times insurance not it won't cover it, and it's, if you've had them or if you're not low enough. But typically, an iron transfusion is the thing they start with if you're severely anemic. I think other ways to kind of reverse engineer that, and not medical advice, but what I've seen people do is potentially seeing a GI specialist. Ulcers and things like that potentially can cause malabsorption. Um, I would also say, and this would probably be tapping more into like Ashley's specialty, but low stomach acid, H. pylori, those are things that potentially can create a lot of issues with anemia, and low iron, low ferritin. Um, I would say that the GI is a piece that is never really talked about. Everybody's always looking at the other pieces or trying to supplement iron. But I think looking at GI is probably one of the bigger pieces and trying to understand that. Um, I'm a little rusty. I need to think about potentially interplay with iron and thyroid. I know there is some connection there, but I don't want to give any false information. Let me look at that quickly and then wrap my head around that, and I can sure I can pick up and run with it. But bear with me. Let me see. Ashley, do you have any insight on how common do you see potentially H. pylori or low stomach acid creating that environment for low iron, low ferritin?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's a lot of things I'll say from the gut standpoint that can influence that. I mean, even in terms of I'm gonna bounce around here. Even as simple as like food things. So like, if they're really big coffee drinkers, like that impedes absorption of iron. So just like thinking through all the pieces here, um, or like lots of calcium, stuff like that. So even like if they eat eggs at the same time as an iron supplement. So anyway, there's just things that way. For sure, low stomach acid, and there's, that could even be from low elastase. H. pylori for sure is a really big one. Um, like PPIs, fecal acid use, stuff like that can definitely impede on that. Other things that have a big influence from the gut, like celiac and Crohn's, if they have a lot of diarrhea or, like an imbalance of just bowels, um, if they've had any like gut surgeries, that can definitely influence that. Um, Even, and this is really more your area, Justin, but like, really big, like, if they're heavy bleeders in their cycle, obviously that can, influence that. I just think like iron is influenced in so many different places. Even got like high inflammation can influence that too. But I think iron is a really tricky one with absorption, which is why I started with food, like food and supplements. There's lots of foods that can help it. There's foods and supplements that can hurt it in terms of absorption. So I just think that's really important to pay attention to, both on where you're getting your iron, but if they're already not great iron absorbers, then just making sure that they're, taking it with vitamin C or eating their high iron with vitamin C, that they're doing it away from coffee and tea, even away from dairy, um, on an empty stomach. Anyway, there's just lots of things that compete with iron. So I just think that's important from that perspective.
Thank you. And I think something, and I don't know how old this is, I'm going to look this up, but there was, uh, no, it is an older study, but I've seen somebody talking about this on social media is using cyclic iron supplementation as like every other day with C versus daily. Apparently, that can help with absorption of iron. I don't know. My algorithm attacks me with hormones and stuff. So I was scrolling and looking at that. I thought that was interesting. It's 13 years old by now, but I do see a lot of people using in a cyclic fashion. That's being talked about more. I think sometimes the iron supplement, though, is just trying to mask the issue. And then they wind up taking iron, and then potentially they're constipated, and then they don't want to take the iron anymore. So, really looking for that root cause. Getting into your question about iron and thyroid. So, it has a lot to do with thyroid peroxidase and the development of or the conversion, I'm sorry, of T4 into T3. Indirectly, though, low thyroid function impacts stomach acidity as well. So if you're hypothyroid or have a sluggish thyroid, that can potentially downregulate stomach acid as well. So I do think they're kind of tied together. So I think, if your thyroid is underactive, potentially that is a factor creating low stomach acid, um, which would then create more issues with iron absorption. But yeah, I would say GI, and if they're cycling, how heavy is their bleed? Those are great places to start. If they're postmenopausal, I would, if it's like chronically low and they're anemic, I would go see a specialist and make sure I don't have an ulcer or something going on, or I'm taking some medication that stops the absorption of iron. I think a couple months ago we did um, a Hormone Happy Hour on certain medications and potential nutrient absorptions. We covered birth control, PPIs, SSRIs, and how those things can deplete certain minerals and cofactors in the body. So thinking through, I wish there was like one thing, but it's usually like layers and layers of stuff.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. It's always a chain effect
Yeah,
of something.
absolutely.
Hmm. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate everybody hopping on today and spending some time with us. I hope everybody has a good week, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.